The morning light cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive conference room, casting long shadows across the mahogany table. I sat in my usual chair, third from the head, watching dust particles drift through the air like they had all the time in the world. My name is Sarah Knight. I'm 44 years old, and until 20 minutes ago, I was the lead software architect at Crest Solutions, a fintech platform that processed over $3 billion in transactions monthly. Across from me stood Zachary Fields, the new CEO. Early 40s, expensive watch, the kind of smile that belonged in a TED Talk about disruption. He'd been with us for 8 months, brought in by the board to accelerate growth and modernize operations. Those were the exact words from the press release. "Sarah," he began, his voice carrying that rehearsed warmth that made my skin prickle. "We need to have a conversation about the future direction of our technology stack." I didn't respond immediately. 15 years teaches you when to speak and when to let silence do the work. He continued, pacing slowly near the windows. "The board and I have been reviewing our technical infrastructure. Your contributions over the years have been significant." The pause before that last word told me everything. "However," Zachary said, turning to face me directly, "the industry has evolved. Our competitors are leveraging newer frameworks, cloud-native architectures, microservices. Your approach, while stable, represents an older paradigm." "Older paradigm," I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. "The system you built 15 years ago was perfect for its time," he continued. "But we're operating in a different landscape now. Speed to market, agility, innovation, these are the currencies that matter." I leaned back slightly. "That system handled Black Friday last year with zero downtime while our 3 largest competitors crashed. It processes payroll for 2 million employees across 400 companies. It's passed every single security audit since implementation." Zachary's smile tightened. "Past performance doesn't guarantee future relevance, Sarah. We've brought in a consulting firm, Rise Advisory, to evaluate our technical debt and recommend modernization strategies. Their assessment was clear. We need fresh perspectives, newer skill sets." There was the real message buried under corporate language. "You're letting me go," I said. "Not a question." "We're restructuring," he replied smoothly. "Your role is being eliminated as part of a broader reorganization. We'll provide a generous severance package, of course. 6 months' salary, benefits continuation, and a positive reference." I looked around the room. 4 other executives sat there watching. None of them met my eyes. Not Adrian, the CTO who I'd trained from a junior developer. Not Helena, the COO who'd relied on my crisis management during the 2019 security breach. Not even Paul, the CFO who understood exactly how much money my architecture had saved the company. "When?" I asked. "Effective immediately," Zachary replied. "We'll need your credentials, access cards, and company devices. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." Clean. Final. Surgical. I stood up slowly, gathering my tablet and water bottle. 15 years of late nights, emergency calls, system rescues, and architectural decisions that held the company together like invisible scaffolding. All of it reduced to older paradigm. As I reached the door, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I never checked messages during meetings, but something made me glance at the screen. The notification made my hand pause on the door handle. It was an automated alert from the system. One I'd set up years ago. One that nobody else knew existed. If this scene resonates deeper than you expected, you're not alone. Sometimes stories surface truths we've been carrying quietly. Take a moment to look out a window if you can, focus on something distant, let your eyes rest. Where are you watching from today? If this story speaks to something you've experienced, consider subscribing and staying with me through what happens next. The walk of clarity. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel. Each step echoed against polished marble floors that I'd walked across thousands of times. Morning meetings, late-night emergencies, weekend deployments when everyone else was home with their families. The building knew my rhythms better than most people did. Eyes tracked me from cubicles and glass offices. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Keyboards went silent. News travels faster than light in corporate environments, carried on Slack channels and whispered exchanges by the coffee machine. Kept my pace steady, controlled. 15 years builds a particular kind of composure. I knew every turn, every door, Every structural quirk of this building because I'd been here when they'd renovated the third floor, when they'd expanded into the adjacent building, when they'd upgraded the server rooms that now hummed in climate-controlled silence 3 floors below my feet. At the security desk, a young woman stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over her coffee. Her badge identified her as Victoria, hired within the last 6 months based on the lanyard color. "Ms. Knight," she said, voice uncertain. "I've been instructed to. I have a box for your belongings." "I know," I said gently. "You're doing your job." Relief washed across her face. She handed me a standard cardboard box, the kind reserved for departures. Inside, I would place the accumulated artifacts of 15 years. My collection of vintage programming books. The photo from our Series B celebration. The coffee mug that read, "There are only 10 types of people in the world. Those who understand binary and those who don't." I surrendered my access badge first. It felt lighter than it should have, just a piece of plastic with an embedded chip. Then my phone. Company-issued, encrypted, containing years of notes and architectural diagrams I could recreate from memory if needed. "Sarah." The voice came from behind me. I turned to see Adrian Reeves, the CTO. Late 30s, brilliant with algorithms, terrible with conflict. He'd been my protege once, back when he joined as a junior developer with more enthusiasm than experience. "I just heard," he said, approaching carefully. "Zachary didn't consult me on this. I would have fought it." "Would you have?" I asked, keeping my tone even. He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. The board made the decision. He presented it as already determined. "Decisions are always determined," I replied, "until someone with authority questions them." Adrian looked past me toward the elevators, the offices beyond, the infrastructure that hummed invisibly behind walls and beneath floors. "Who's going to manage the core platform? The transaction processing engine, the encryption layers, the failover protocols?" "That," I said quietly, "is no longer my concern. You approved this restructuring by staying silent." I could see him processing that, trying to formulate a response that would absolve him of responsibility while maintaining his position. "Sarah, please. Let's go upstairs. We can talk to Zachary, explain the risks." "The risks were always there," I interrupted. "Every system carries risks. The question is whether you understand them well enough to prevent them from becoming disasters." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "Good luck," I said, and meant it in all the ways he wouldn't understand until later. Outside, the city moved with indifferent momentum. Cars passed. People hurried along sidewalks, absorbed in their own trajectories. The world doesn't pause when your professional identity dissolves. It just keeps turning. I stood there for a moment, box under my arm, feeling the weight of it settle. Not sadness. Not anger. Something clearer than both. A crystalline understanding of what came next. My phone vibrated again. Personal phone this time, the one they hadn't confiscated. I answered. "Sarah Knight," I said. "Ms. Knight, this is Nathaniel Brooks from Fortress Financial Systems. We've been following your work for years. We understand you might be considering new opportunities." I smiled just slightly. "What makes you think I'm available?" "Industry sources," he replied diplomatically. "We're building next-generation payment infrastructure, and we need someone who understands that innovation without stability is just expensive failure." "Tell me about your architecture," I said. Behind me, Crest Solutions continued operating. Transactions processed. Systems hummed. Everything appeared normal because good architecture doesn't fail immediately. It waits. It holds. It gives you time to realize what you've lost. But that time, I knew, was already running out. The call that shifted everything. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I found myself at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, the kind with mismatched furniture and baristas who didn't try to upsell you on seasonal drinks. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window, watching the city move while my phone conversation with Nathaniel Brooks from Fortress Financial continued. "Our current system can't scale," he was explaining. "We're processing about 500 million in daily transactions, but we're planning to expand internationally. Europe first, then Asia. Our infrastructure keeps buckling under load testing." "What's your current architecture?" I asked. "Monolithic application, MySQL database, load balancers that keep failing during peak hours. We tried migrating to microservices last year, but the transition created more problems than it solved." Classic mistake. I'd seen it a dozen times. Companies rushing toward trendy solutions without understanding the fundamental problems. Microservices aren't a silver bullet, I said. They introduce complexity. Distributed systems are harder to debug, harder to secure, harder to maintain. If your monolith is failing, it's usually because of specific bottlenecks, not because the entire approach is wrong. That's exactly what we need to hear, Nathaniel replied. Someone who understands that new isn't automatically better. Can we schedule a meeting? We're prepared to offer senior architect role equity and complete authority over technical decisions. Send me the details, I said. I'll review them. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, coffee cooling in my hands. 15 years. I'd given Crest 15 years of expertise, nights, weekends, birthdays, anniversaries. I'd missed my nephew's graduation because of a critical system failure. I'd canceled a vacation to Greece because of a security audit. I'd sacrificed relationships, health, peace of mind. And they'd called it older paradigm. My personal phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Helena Montgomery, one of the few executives who'd shown genuine respect over the years. I'm sorry about today. I argued against it but was overruled. If you need a reference or anything else, please reach out. I appreciated the gesture, but it changed nothing. Good intentions don't protect you when institutional momentum moves in the wrong direction. I opened my laptop, personal device, not company property, and logged into a private server I maintained for my own projects. Inside was a folder labeled Crest Architecture, Comprehensive Documentation. 15 years of knowledge. Every decision, every trade-off, every hidden dependency. The encryption protocols I'd designed specifically for financial compliance. The load balancing algorithm that distributed traffic in ways standard solutions couldn't match. The failover systems that had saved the company during the 2020 server crisis. All of it documented in meticulous detail. But here's what nobody at Crest knew. That documentation wasn't in their repositories. It was here in my private archive, because I'd learned early in my career that companies don't value knowledge until it's gone. I'd always planned to transfer it properly when I eventually retired or transitioned to a new role. I'd imagined a proper handoff, training sessions, thorough knowledge transfer. That opportunity had just been eliminated. I closed the laptop and stared out the window. A question formed in my mind, clear and unavoidable. What happens when you remove the person who understands not just how a system works but why it was built that way? The answer, I suspected, would reveal itself soon enough. By the time I got home, it was late afternoon. The house felt too quiet, too empty. I lived alone, had for years. The demands of my job had made relationships complicated. Partners who didn't understand why I needed to take calls at midnight, who thought my dedication was obsession, who eventually drifted away toward people with more predictable lives. I unpacked the box slowly. Books on my shelf. Photo on the desk. Mug in the kitchen cabinet. Each item found its place, transforming from office artifacts back into personal possessions. Then I sat down at my desk and opened my email. 17 new messages. 3 from recruiters who'd somehow heard about my departure within hours. 2 from former colleagues expressing sympathy. 1 from the legal department at Crest with the subject line, severance agreement and post-employment obligations. I opened that one first. Standard language. Non-compete clause limiting where I could work. Non-disparagement agreement preventing me from speaking negatively about the company. Intellectual property assignment confirming that everything I'd created belonged to Crest. I read it carefully, professionally. Here's what they'd missed. Intellectual property assignment only covered work created during employment. My personal documentation, my private notes, my architectural insights stored on my own servers. Those belonged to me. And they just lost access to all of it. At 8:47 p.m. my phone rang. Sarah, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. The encryption module for wire transfers. Where's the documentation for the key rotation protocol? I closed my eyes. The key rotation protocol was one of my most critical security implementations. It automatically rotated encryption keys every 72 hours, preventing long-term cryptographic vulnerabilities. But it was complex, with specific timing requirements and failover mechanisms. It should be in the main repository, I said carefully. I've looked. There's high-level documentation but not the implementation details. Not the edge cases or the recovery procedures if something goes wrong. Did you check the architecture wiki? Everything there is years old. You mentioned updating it, but I'd been too busy actually maintaining the system to document every change for people who hadn't valued that work. Adrian, I don't work there anymore, I said gently. You'll need to figure it out. Sarah, please. I know today was unfair, but the system still needs. The system, I interrupted, will do exactly what it was designed to do. If you don't understand it well enough to maintain it, that's a decision Crest made when they eliminated my position. Silence on the other end. You're really going to do this? He asked quietly. I'm not doing anything, I replied. I'm simply not available to fix problems for a company that decided my expertise was obsolete. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my home office, watching city lights flicker through the window. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt precise. Because the thing nobody at Crest understood was this. I hadn't built that system to be maintained by people who didn't respect the complexity involved. I'd built it to be maintained by me, with the assumption that institutional knowledge would be valued, preserved, transferred carefully. Remove that assumption, and the entire structure became fragile in ways they couldn't see yet. But they would. The first fracture. The cracks started appearing exactly where I knew they would. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with the quiet insistence of a foundation beginning to shift. At 6:23 a.m. the next morning, my personal phone rang. I was already awake, coffee brewing, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of amber and rose. It was Adrian again. We have a situation, he said without preamble. The overnight batch processing failed. Payroll for 300,000 employees didn't complete. I took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Sarah, are you there? I'm here, I said. What's the error message? That's the problem. There is no error message. The process just stopped. At 3:47 a.m. No logs, no alerts, nothing. I knew exactly what had happened. The batch processing system included a health check routine that verified the integrity of the encryption module. If that check failed, the system would gracefully halt rather than risk processing financial data with compromised security. It was a feature I'd implemented after a near-miss incident in 2021. Have you checked the encryption module status? I asked. How do I do that? I closed my eyes. Adrian, you're the CTO. I know, but you always handled the low-level infrastructure. I focused on the application layer, the user-facing features. You know that. Yes, I knew that. I'd enabled that division of labor for years, handling the complex foundations while others took credit for the visible innovations built on top of them. There should be a monitoring dashboard, I said. Check the encryption key rotation status. I heard typing, mouse clicks, muttered frustration. I found a dashboard, but I don't have access. It's restricted to your login credentials. Of course it was. Some systems required that level of security restriction. I'd always meant to create additional administrator accounts, but there had never been time and nobody had ever asked. Sarah, I need you to walk me through this. I don't work there anymore, I reminded him gently. I understand that, but 300,000 people won't get paid today if we can't resolve this. That's not about Crest. That's about real people with rent and mortgages and... Adrian, I interrupted. When Zachary eliminated my position, did he consider what would happen to those 300,000 people if nobody understood the systems I'd built? Silence. This isn't revenge, I continued. This is consequence. You have talented engineers. You have consultants from Rise Advisory. Figure it out. It could take days to reverse engineer your security protocols. Then it takes days, I said and ended the call. I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. They'd made a business decision. Now they would experience the full cost of that decision. At 9:15 a.m. Zachary called me directly. Sarah, we need to bring you back as a consultant. Temporary basis. Name your rate. High rate, I said slowly, is irrelevant. You determined that my expertise was obsolete. Presumably, your modern frameworks and fresh perspectives can solve this problem more efficiently than my outdated approach. Sarah, please. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I replied. You made a strategic decision about technical leadership. I'm respecting that decision by staying out of your way. We'll pay you double your previous salary. Triple. Just for a few weeks while we transition. Transition to what? I asked. You eliminated the position. There's no role to transition into. His voice hardened. We can make this difficult for you. The severance agreement includes a clause about cooperation with ongoing business needs. The severance agreement, I said calmly, covers post-employment cooperation on legal matters and knowledge transfer within reasonable limits. It doesn't obligate me to provide emergency consulting services to fix problems caused by your restructuring decisions. I could almost hear his jaw clenching. We'll bring in other experts. There are plenty of talented architects. Absolutely, I agreed. I'm sure they'll do excellent work. Of course, they'll need time to understand the existing architecture, the design decisions, the edge cases, the undocumented dependencies. That's assuming they can access the systems at all without the proper credentials. Another long silence. You set this up intentionally, Zachary said. You made yourself indispensable. No, I corrected. I built robust, secure systems that required expertise to maintain. That's not sabotage. That's engineering. The question you should have asked before eliminating my position was, does anyone else understand this well enough to keep it running? This is corporate sabotage. This is the natural result of dismissing institutional knowledge as older paradigm. I haven't touched your systems. I haven't interfered with anything. I've simply stopped providing free expertise to a company that decided it didn't need me. I ended the call before he could respond. By noon, my phone was flooded with messages. Helena asking if there was any way to resolve this professionally. Paul from finance wanting to understand the financial implications of extended downtime. Even some of the engineers I'd mentored asking for guidance. I responded to none of them. Instead, I drafted a professional email to Zachary and the board. I appreciate the severance package and wish Crest continued success. As discussed, my role has been eliminated and I'm pursuing other opportunities. I'm available for structured knowledge transfer sessions at my consulting rate of $950 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 40 hours. This would allow your team to properly document and understand the existing systems. Please have legal contact me if you'd like to proceed with this arrangement. I sent it at 1:47 p.m. and closed my laptop. The consulting rate was intentionally high, not punitive, but reflective of what emergency expertise actually costs. The 40-hour minimum ensured they couldn't just call me for quick fixes without committing to proper knowledge transfer. They wouldn't accept it. I knew that. Pride and ego would prevent them from admitting they needed help at that price. Which meant the systems would continue degrading until they either figured it out themselves or something broke badly enough to force a different conversation. I spent the afternoon on a video call with Fortress Financial, discussing their architecture challenges, their growth plans, their technical philosophy. They listened carefully, asked intelligent questions, treated my experience as valuable rather than obsolete. By the time we finished, they'd offered me a position. Chief Architect, equity stake, complete technical authority, and a mandate to build their infrastructure the right way from the beginning. I accepted. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my quiet kitchen, I received one more message. This one from a junior engineer named Sophie, one of the bright young developers I'd mentored. I don't know what's happening, but I wanted to say thank you for everything you taught me. You made me a better engineer. I stared at that message for a long time. This was never about punishing individuals. It was about forcing an institution to confront the cost of treating expertise as disposable. I replied, keep learning, stay curious, and remember that wisdom isn't obsolete. It's just quiet until you need it. At 11:32 p.m., the first major incident occurred. Transaction processing completely halted. Every payment, every transfer, every financial operation, frozen. My phone began ringing. I turned it off and went to sleep, because the real lesson was just beginning. Cascade. Morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke at 5:30 a.m., made coffee and checked the news on my tablet before looking at my phone. 3 major financial news sites had already picked up the story. Crest Solutions experiences major service disruption. Fintech platform faces unexplained outage. Payment processor Crest down for 12 hours. 12 hours. That was longer than I'd anticipated. Either they were being extremely careful or they were more lost than I'd realized. I turned my phone back on. 47 missed calls. 63 text messages. 21 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I got dressed, drove to my new office at Fortress Financial, and began my first official day. The contrast was jarring. Where Crest had become bureaucratic and political, Fortress was hungry and focused. Where Zachary had dismissed experience as obsolete, Nathaniel Brooks at Fortress treated it as their most valuable asset. "We want to build this right," Nathaniel told me during our morning meeting. "Not fast, not trendy. Right. Stable, secure, scalable. We'd rather take an extra 6 months and build something that lasts than rush to market with something fragile." "That," I said, "is the correct philosophy." Around 10:30 a.m., my personal phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Ms. Knight, this is Patricia Ewan from the Board of Directors at Crest. We need to speak with you urgently." Board level. This was escalating faster than I'd expected. "I'm in the middle of my first day at a new position," I said. "Perhaps we can schedule something next week?" "Ms. Knight, our entire platform has been down for 14 hours. We're losing millions of dollars. Our clients are threatening to leave. We need your help immediately." "What happened to the consulting firm? Rise Advisory, wasn't it? The ones with fresh perspectives and modern approaches." Pause. "They've been unable to resolve the issue." "And your internal team?" "They're working around the clock, but they're missing critical information about the system architecture." "What kind of information?" I asked, though I already knew. "Security protocols, encryption configurations, failover procedures. Things that apparently weren't documented in our repositories." "Why weren't they documented?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "We're not sure." I could have explained. I could have told her that I'd maintained personal documentation because 15 years of experience had taught me that companies often fail to value knowledge management until it's too late. I could have mentioned that I'd repeatedly suggested hiring an additional senior architect to provide redundancy, but budget constraints had prevented it. I could have pointed out that institutional knowledge requires institutional investment. Instead, I said, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come back. Temporarily. As a contractor. We'll pay whatever you want. I have a new position. I started today. I can't just abandon that commitment." "Please, Ms. Knight. We understand there were mistakes made in how your departure was handled. But right now we have 300,000 people who haven't received payroll, and our clients are experiencing transaction failures that could trigger regulatory investigations." The regulatory angle was new. That meant the situation was even worse than I'd thought. "What's your offer?" I asked. "Name your terms." I thought about it carefully. Not about money, but about precedent. About the message this would send to every company that treated experienced professionals as disposable. $2,000 per hour, I said. Minimum 100 hours. Payment in advance. And I don't report to Zachary. I report directly to the board and have final authority on all technical decisions during the engagement. That's $200,000 just for the retainer. "That's the cost of emergency expertise," I replied. "It's negotiable if you'd prefer to wait until your team figures it out on their own." "Hold on." I heard muffled conversation, hands over the phone, urgent whispers. "We accept your terms," Patricia said when she returned. "How soon can you start?" "I'll need to discuss this with my new employer. If they're willing to loan me out for this emergency, and that's a significant if, I could potentially begin tomorrow. But I want to be clear. This is a limited engagement to restore service and transfer knowledge. I'm not coming back permanently." "Understood. We'll have contracts drawn up immediately." After I hung up, I sat in my new office, looking out at a city that seemed indifferent to these corporate dramas. Nathaniel knocked on my doorframe. "Everything okay?" he asked. "You look conflicted." I explained the situation. To his credit, he listened without interrupting. "What do you want to do?" he asked when I finished. "Honestly, part of me wants to let them suffer the consequences. They made a calculated decision that my expertise was expendable. Now they're experiencing the cost of that calculation. But there are 300,000 people who need to be paid. Client companies that depend on that platform. Employees at Crest who had nothing to do with the decision to fire me." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. "Here's my perspective. You're exactly the kind of person we want leading our architecture. Someone who understands that systems serve people, not egos. If you need to take a few weeks to clean up this mess and do it the right way, we'll support that. Consider it a preview of how you'll build our systems, with integrity intact. You're sure? Completely. But Sarah? Make sure they understand the full cost of what they did. Not just in dollars but in institutional learning. I spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a detailed contract with the help of a lawyer friend. The terms were explicit. Full access to all systems, final technical authority, no interference from Zachary or the RISE consultants, and a comprehensive knowledge transfer plan that would take at minimum 4 weeks to execute properly. By 6 p.m., Crest's legal team had signed everything. The retainer payment hit my account 30 minutes later. I drove to Crest's office at 7 p.m., after most of the staff had gone home. The building looked the same but felt different. There was a desperation in the air, a tension that hummed through the fluorescent lights and empty corridors. Adrian met me at the door. He looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept since I'd left. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I'm not here for gratitude," I replied. "I'm here because the situation requires expertise. Let's see the damage." He led me to the main operations center. Screens glowed with error messages and status indicators. Half a dozen engineers hunched over keyboards, trying approaches that I could see were fundamentally misguided. "Everyone stop," I said, not loudly but with unmistakable authority. The room went silent. Engineers looked up, some with relief, others with resentment. "I need to understand exactly what you've tried and what state the systems are in. Nobody touches anything until I've assessed the situation. One wrong move at this point could make things exponentially worse." For the next 3 hours I conducted a forensic analysis. What I found was worse than I'd anticipated. The RISE consultants hadn't just failed to fix the problem, they'd actively made it worse by attempting to bypass security protocols they didn't understand. They tried to force a manual key rotation, I said to Adrian around 10 p.m., without following the proper sequence. That triggered the failsafe lockdown. "Can you unlock it?" "Yes. But it'll take time and it requires following a precise recovery procedure. If we rush this, we could corrupt the encryption layer permanently." "How long?" 12 hours if nothing goes wrong. 24 if we encounter additional complications." He looked devastated. "We're already at 18 hours of downtime." "Then you'd better hope I can do this in 12, I said and got to work. The building emptied around midnight. Only Adrian and 2 senior engineers remained, watching as I navigated through layers of security protocols, verification procedures, and recovery sequences that existed nowhere in their documentation because they lived in my memory. At 4:30 a.m. the first systems came back online. At 6:15 a.m. transaction processing resumed. At 7:45 a.m., the overnight payroll batch finally completed, depositing 300,000 paychecks that were now nearly 30 hours late. I stood up from the terminal, stretched my back and turned to Adrian. "The immediate crisis is resolved," I said. "But you need to understand something. This wasn't a random failure. This was the inevitable result of not understanding what you had." He nodded, too tired to argue. "Over the next 4 weeks, I'm going to conduct a comprehensive knowledge transfer. I'm going to document every system, every protocol, every design decision. And you're going to assign at least 3 engineers to learn all of it. Not so you can fire me again, but so this never happens again." "Understood," he said quietly. I left the building as the sun rose, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. My phone buzzed with messages of relief, gratitude, and carefully worded apologies. None of them mattered. What mattered was the lesson they'd just paid $200,000 to begin learning. Expertise isn't obsolete, it's just invisible until it's gone. The reckoning. 3 days into my contracted return, the full scope of the damage became apparent. I spent those days in conference rooms with engineers, walking them through architectural decisions that had seemed obvious at the time but now required careful explanation. "Why did you use this specific encryption algorithm?" a young developer named Connor asked, gesturing at code on the screen. "Because it's FIPS 140-2 compliant," I explained. "Federal Information Processing Standard. Financial institutions processing government payroll need that certification. The newer algorithms you're thinking of are faster, but they're not certified yet." But we could apply for certification, which takes 18 months and costs approximately $300,000. I interrupted gently. This is what I mean by older paradigm. Sometimes what looks outdated is actually careful compliance with regulatory requirements. Connor nodded slowly, making notes. These sessions repeated constantly. Each question revealed another gap in understanding, another assumption that had been made without context, another shortcut that would have introduced subtle failures months or years down the line. On the fourth day, Zachary requested a meeting. I arrived at the conference room to find not just Zachary, but the entire board of directors. 8 people around the table, representing hundreds of millions of dollars in investment and oversight responsibility. Patricia Ewan, who I'd spoken with during the crisis, sat at the head of the table. She was in her 60s, former CFO of a major bank, known for being uncompromising about risk management. "Ms. Knight," she began, "thank you for your work this week. You've restored our operations and prevented what could have been a catastrophic situation." I nodded, waiting. "We've been reviewing the circumstances that led to your departure," she continued, "and the subsequent crisis. We need to understand from your perspective how this happened." I looked around the table. Some faces curious, others defensive. Zachary sat 3 seats down, expression carefully neutral. "You want the technical explanation or the institutional one?" I asked. "Both," Patricia said. I took a breath. Technically, the crisis occurred because the new leadership made changes to critical systems without understanding the dependencies involved. They disabled security protocols assuming they were redundant when in fact they were essential. They attempted to modernize the architecture without comprehending why it was built the way it was. Several board members glanced at Zachary, who remained motionless. "Institutionally," I continued, "the crisis occurred because you eliminated the only person